think we all know Jerry is a wonderful colleague, a wonderful friend, a wonderful husband, and a person of kindness and great integrity, and a colleague that we can only dream of having. I'm going to miss him more than lots of people when he retires at the end of this year, and so I'm so happy that when I asked him to do this, he agreed to do this, because he doesn't have to do this anymore. He's retiring, he can just hang out, chill out, and lay back, and he's not. He's doing this, and he took it so seriously, and I'm so happy that he agreed to do this. I'm so lucky to have him as a friend, and I often hear his thoughts and ideas, and I'm so glad that he can share them with you. And I'm going to ask Wendy, who knows him a little better than I do, to do a more formal introduction.
So this isn't fair. I know what he's going to say, but he doesn't know what I'm going to say. I've been given just a minute or two to introduce my husband, Gerald Galgan. See, like Emily, normally I would not write this down, but I was afraid I'd cry, so I have to do this. Normally an introduction such as this one would give details about Jerry's 3 books, his journal articles, and his other academic achievements, of which there are many, but you can read about those on the college's website. What I want to do, which is in keeping with the personal and non-academic nature of Jerry's talk, is tell you a little about the man himself. When I came to the college, the first faculty member to welcome me was Jerry. He had read in the newsletter that I write poetry, and so does he, and over the next 2.5 years, we ran a writing workshop for faculty, staff, and administration, and shared our poetry with each other. He finally, 2.5 years later, asked me on a date in October 1998, and in March 1999, yes, 5 months later, we were married in the chapel right downstairs. I share this story because when people at the college learned we were engaged, there was a steady, and I mean steady, stream of women who came up to me, hugged me, and said, I quote, "You are so lucky." You see, my husband has many wonderful qualities. And one of the most wonderful is that he respects and admires women. He listens, really listens, to what we have to say and values our intellects and opinions. As any woman here can tell you, that is not always the case. My mother always told me, don't want to get married, meet the man you want to marry, and I did. Over the years, my love and admiration for my husband have continued to grow. He has a fierce and rigorous intellect. He is thoughtful and funny and always gracious. He is an excellent teacher and a supportive colleague and friend. He is kind and compassionate and is a man of extraordinary integrity. In a moment, see, I'm going to cry. In a moment, Jerry will talk to you about his personal journey through the liberal arts, a journey that began when he was a child and that continues to this day. I am so incredibly blessed that for the past 16.5 years, he has shared that journey with me. I am pleased and proud to present my husband, Gerald Galgan.
Yeah, thank you all for coming here to listen to me. I was born on June 12th, 1942 in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Born of Polish parents, Helen Ruskowski Galgan and Anthony Galgan. My mother insisted on dropping the slash over the L in our last name, Galgan, and in having me baptized in what they called in those days the Irish Church, St. Bridget's. She did not send me to the Polish Catholic school that most of my older cousins went to. And of course, what did she name me? Gerald. Who ever heard of a Polish kid called Gerald? All of this eventually led to upward mobility, the move from the tenements of the Lower East Side to a more spacious apartment in Long Island City, a move as much intellectual as physical. For it was here that I began my journey through a liberal education. And so into the first grade, and my first teacher, whose name I still remember, Sister James Annette. I figure she was 18 years old at the time, and she was an angel of mercy to me. I remember the first day of class, and a fellow student who raised her hand and informed Sister James Annette that there was a puddle under my desk. But Sister's response was not a ruler, but an embrace. a comforting, an encouragement. I eventually overcame my fear of what was initially an alien environment and entered the world of liberal education thanks to Sister James Annette. Years later, one of my colleagues, Sister Judith, informed me that Sister James Annette was still alive. She was in a nursing home, and I sent her a copy of my second book, God and Subjectivity, writing on the flyleaf, "Your loving student, Gerald." The first non-nun that I had as a teacher was in the 4th grade, Miss McCarthy, a pretty young woman with flaming red hair. I had such a crush on Miss McCarthy. How could I ever learn fractions? But one smile from her was worth 1,000 fractions. With this introduction of higher level mathematics, I began to experience, although not yet see, the connections between liberal arts and other disciplines such as math and science. The paving stones continued to be laid in the path ahead of me, the path my journey through liberal arts would take. And then there was Mrs. Walsh in the 5th grade, another non-nun. Mrs. Walsh tried to do many things for me, but the most important of them was that she told me and the rest of the class that we had to get a library card from Queensborough Public Library. And so I discovered the library, which was right down the block from my house. How lucky could I be? The library, what was it? It was a storefront library, one big room. There were no children's and adult sections, and I remember first going in. It was like a temple. Will I ever read all these books? There was no one around to tell me, "Don't worry, kid, you don't have to." But there was an adult, a man who taught me to use the card catalog. And now my journey entered a further stage. I remember my first borrowed book on radio electronics. In the 5th grade, I didn't understand 9/10 of it, maybe 10/10 of it. But it kind of justified or explained to me why I love the radio. Television hadn't come along yet. Eventually, I found science fiction. And in the 7th grade, I spent a lot of time, more time than I should have spent, reading, devouring science fiction. Here was a genre that embodied the best aspects of liberal education, a blending of the humanities and the sciences. And this led me to a love of science, especially astronomy. I began to go wild about astronomy. And that led to the 8th grade, and my long love affair with reading books on astronomy and trying to pass history and playing stickball and stoopball and slapball and sometimes softball in the streets and the playgrounds such as we had them of Long Island City. I wanted to go to high school at St. Francis Prep. In those days it was down in Brooklyn, with Brooklyn Tech my second choice, because I was already on the way to thinking of myself as a scientist or maybe as an engineer. But I didn't make either school. So that left Holy Cross High School, a brand new boys' school in Flushing in those days, and Rice High School in Harlem. Once again, my mother's wisdom prevailed. Holy Cross was $30 a month. Wow, that was a lot of money then. And Rice was $12 a month. Rice was a great school, but my mother said, "What do you want to study?" I said, "Science, Mom." She said, "Are the labs at Rice as good as the labs at Holy Cross?" Not from what I could see. She said, "Okay, you're going to Holy Cross." This meant that she had to go out and get a job. My mother, who went no further than 8th grade, thus provided me with a clear, practical, and loving demonstration of the importance of education. My father, too, played an important role. He worked hard, not only to put food on the table, but to help me realize my full potential. I have distinct memories of my father taking my cousin Eddie and me on excursions. My cousin Eddie would say, "Oh boy, a walk with Uncle Skinny." They call my father Uncle Skinny. What was a walk with Uncle Skinny? It was through the railway yards at Long Island City, jumping boxcars, although not moving ones. It was through endless junkyards looking for hubcaps. And then at the end of these excursions, my father telling me, "Look, don't tell your mother." Much of what I do and much of who I am are because of these two strong, loving people. They were my first and maybe my best teachers. As I was finishing 8th grade and preparing to enter high school, I was, of course, nervous about how well I would do. Looking back now, I realized that I was well prepared to meet the challenges of high school. This is because by the time I graduated from the 8th grade, I was a strong reader, I could write clear and grammatically correct prose, and I had received what I would learn later was a thorough grounding in the liberal arts, as well as the skills necessary to succeed educationally. I came into Holy Cross halfway through the first ever class of the school, which in January 1956, we always called ourselves number 1. We were seniors for 4 years. But in those days, the Catholic schools graduated a class in June and a class in January. What did these January kids, which was me, have to do? Well, find a high school that made up that half year by going to summer school for freshmen and summer and sophomore year. That sounded terrible, but it had its advantages. I lost 2 summers of play, but I started by making up the first half of biology. The summer after, I took the second half of biology. You figure that. Nonetheless, during that first summer, I found a teacher, a brother, whose love of biology inflamed me. I still remember his reading to the class, my personification of the digestive process. Here was my very own science fiction, or rather fictional science, being read out loud by a teacher I admired. The seed was planted, and while it would take a little time for it to take root, when it did, I would become a writer. And then there was the second summer, and another brother who casually, somewhere near the end of the course, mentioned a book that he thought we should read. Thomas Merton's The Seven-Story Mountain. I managed to get this book from the school library under the wise rulership of Brother Franciscus, who was always telling me what books he thought I should read. Brother Franciscus, I later discovered, was the author of one of the stories in our textbook, So You're a Brother, Father, which tried to explain why Catholics were always confusing brothers with priests. We don't have that problem today. Which tried to explain why Catholics were always confusing brothers with priests. Yes, the seed was something was being planted here. I read Brother Franciscus's essay, and I read The Seven-Story Mountain, about Thomas Merton's journey from the secular world of Columbia University to a Cistercian Trappist monastery. And my 15-year-old self decided he wanted to be a priest, ultimately choosing the Diocese of Brooklyn. That may have been my doom. Even while I was preparing to enter the seminary, people were always confusing me. Oh, you're going to the cemetery? But while I was preparing to enter the seminary, there was another stream from the past exerting its influence on me. In grammar school, we had to memorize many poems, but somehow the one that stuck in my mind, 2 lines, was by Longfellow. Life is real, life is earnest, out of the grave is not its goal. I started writing poetry, or what I thought was poetry, in high school, and this led me in my 3rd year at Holy Cross to encounter Brother Jeffrey Schreiber, Brothers of the Holy Cross, who inflamed in me a love of literature and drama and Shakespeare and all that stuff. This ultimately led me down the primrose path of acting, appearing in high school plays, the summit of which in my senior year, December of 1958, was my role as stage manager in Our Town by Thornton Wilder. I may have found myself drawn to the possibility of living a life of faith as a priest, but as you can see, the life of the mind, the life offered by liberal arts, still had a strong hold on me. Also girls, but we're not going to get into that. During this time, as Wendy said, he does love women. During this time, largely on the basis of Thomas Merton's influence, I discovered Dorothy Day in The Catholic Worker. One of the reasons why Professor Horowitz and I began talking. I had the astounding privilege of getting to know a great woman whom I still firmly believe should be Saint Dorothy Day, and I'm waiting for the Catholic Church to come to its senses. Here, during my time spent at the Catholic Worker, I saw how faith and the liberal arts complement each other, give each other strength, and help provide physical, emotional, and spiritual sustenance to people who needed it. While some may think of the liberal arts as merely intellectual exercises, I know from experience that they can have a profound, lasting, and very physical impact on people who are given the opportunity to experience them. I do not have time today, nor would you want me to trace all my experiences when I was in Cathedral College, and then the seminary at Huntington, Long Island, for 2 years of philosophy and 1 year of theology, but I do want to share a couple of experiences with you. While I was at Cathedral, Father Eugene Feldhaus offered me a ticket to the symphony. I think it was Boston Symphony at BAM, actually. And unfortunately, the performance was the night before an exam. When I explained this to him, he cocked his head and he replied, "Don't let your studies get in the way of your education." So I went to the symphony and somehow miraculously managed to pass the astronomy exam. I also have to say here, thank God for Cathedral College requiring me to take 2 years of classical Greek. I struggled with it, never managed to get more than C, but it led me into ancient civilization and ultimately ancient philosophy. The strong liberal arts curriculum at Cathedral and Huntington did just exactly what it was supposed to do. When I was taking theology, I longed for English courses. When I was taking English courses, I wished I were taking philosophy instead. And when I was taking philosophy, I wanted nothing more than another chance to study history. Each discipline fed into the other. And what I ultimately came to realize was that I could study all these areas and more. Toward the end of my time in the seminary, I chose to work at Peter Claver Roman Catholic Church in Brooklyn. This was in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and to my knowledge, the only Catholic church in the diocese at that time, there are none anymore, serving an African-American parish. Joseph Papp brought Shakespeare's plays to Bed-Stuy that summer, and it took some convincing to get the kids to go. I think they may have finally agreed just to have something to do. However, I will never forget their laughter, their rapt attention, and their appreciation for Midsummer Night's Dream. For a short time, the bard was in Brooklyn, and he found a welcoming home. It was the summer of 1963. I had just graduated from Cathedral College, and I found myself on a bus, along with many others from Peter Claver, traveling to Washington to join in the March for Jobs and Freedom. I still have my button. To this day, I can think of no finer example of the role that liberal arts play in the betterment of humankind than when I saw and heard what I saw and heard during that march. From plain and simple speeches to the music of Dylan and Baez, My students don't know who the hell Bill Dylan and Bud is. To the soaring rhetoric of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. The liberal arts, both formal and informal, carried a message to the country and beyond. Change was not immediate, but the foundation for change was laid that day in the mall in Washington. One final story from that time. I was once again in Washington at the very end of my seminary career. I was about to go over the wall, but I gave it one last try, and this was the Divinity Students' Vigil for the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Our booth was next to that of the American Nazi Party. It's right in front of the Lincoln Memorial. As I left one of my shifts, the Nazi next to me left his. A car pulled up, about to go around the circle. I went into great fear. It was coming back? Was I about to be shot? No, thank God. What happened? I was mooned. I'm not going to tell you what that is.
Oh, move.
A certain part of the anatomy. And that just about said it all for me. I came to the conclusion that these guys, these Nazis, needed a little dose of liberal arts education. Maybe that might have helped them. Obviously, I did not become a priest. After leaving the seminary in September of '64, once again, the revelations of a book, Mortimer Adler's glorious How to Read a Book, changed everything. Adler convinced me you could do more good as a teacher than you could as a novelist or even a lawmaker. I don't know. Maybe he vastly deceived me. And so began my desire to become a college professor. You can see, I always needed a vocation. Teaching could never just be a job. It's like a calling, you know. And that's, I don't know. Somebody asked me, what's a good teacher? I found one common denominator in teachers. They're all crazy. The best teachers, they're all crazy. They're head over heels, madly in love with their subjects. So, Adler convinced me that you try being a teacher. The question was, in what? I was interested in philosophy as much as I was in theology. I was interested in English as much as I was in history. Adler's book convinced me that my best bet was philosophy, in the sense that it was capable of comprehending, in both meanings of the word, literature, history, and theology. In fact, philosophy comprehends all the disciplines in one way or another, so I took the next step in my lifelong journey through the liberal arts and entered the PhD program in philosophy at Fordham University under the Jesuits, where I encountered the majestic Robert Pollock. He wasn't a Jesuit, the greatest teacher in my life. 2 years later, in March of 1966, while still a graduate student, I heard about an opening for a philosophy professor at St. Francis College. 6 months after that, in September of '66, I taught my first course here at the college. There were, as some of you may remember, these were turbulent times in the country as a whole and on college campuses in particular. There were tensions between working class people and college students, between blacks and whites, between hawks and doves, the Vietnam thing. Liberal arts were under attack, seen by many as too intellectual, too out of touch with the way the world really was. These tensions are well illustrated by something that happened in my classroom at one point during those years. The college was building an addition, the science building, and there were a lot of construction workers on campus. In the middle of my class on moral philosophy, a construction worker climbed through the window with his pail and sauntered in front of me to the door, while my students looked on in amazement. His contempt for the academic enterprise was palpable. However, many of my students, indeed, many of the students at St. Francis College, were children of construction workers. and cops and sanitation workers. Their parents, like mine, saw the value of an education. Their parents did this, and their parents, like mine, wanted their children to have a better life, but that better life was not to be measured merely in skills attained and money earned. No, it was to be better because, at least in part, it would be a life of the mind. Socrates examined life, if you will, and the liberal arts education would ensure that better life. I have been incredibly lucky to have taught at St. Francis College. Here I have had the pleasure of teaching in the liberal arts alongside many dedicated and thoughtful colleagues. Right? Let's not get into the bad memories. I'm just going to concentrate. I cannot name them all here, but I want to mention a few. Dr. Francis Green, recently retired chair and professor of fine arts. Dr. Jimmy Corrigan in biology. Dr. Frank Sorrentino in political science. Years ago, Dr. Joe Schneider in chemistry. Years ago, Dr. Edgar and Claire Tashigan in biology. Dr. Robert Fox years ago in English. And I can go on and on and on. And more recently, Dr. Jennifer Wingate in fine arts and Dr. Emily Horowitz in sociology. Boy, what luck to be teaching with people like these. So I count my blessings. And of course, the members of the philosophy department, past and present, from whom I have learned so much. Brother Pascal Kelly, who brought me to St. Francis College. Professor Frank Slade, who was my chairman for many years and had taught me how to talk philosophy. Dr. Joseph Carpino, who taught me how to write philosophy. And Dr. Nino Langiuli, who taught me how to argue philosophy. And of course, my current chair, Dr. Sophie Berman, to which I would add her husband, Michael. I can only quote Isaac Newton, whom I think got it from John of Salisbury. If I have seen far, it is only because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And I seriously mean that. I have had so many wonderful students, bright and talented young men and women who have enriched my life by their presence in my classroom. Professors McIntyre and Mulligan, who are now on the business faculty, members here at the college. Dr. Sharon Bourgeois, an adjunct in psychology. She was my student. Chris Carone, an adjunct in history. Madeline Hanley, now Chief CIO at St. Francis. Dr. Joseph Marino, adjunct in philosophy. Dr. Alan Udoff, now retired professor of philosophy and Jewish studies. Dr. Erich Shohat, professor of mathematics. Dr. Peter Leonard, who came back as an adjunct in philosophy and then went on to teach at Vassar. Dr. Frank Leccaro, who came back to teach business here at St. Francis and eventually went on to Pace University, and who said to his classes that the most important course you could take to prepare you for the business world is philosophy. Dr. Ann Hardle, who came back to teach philosophy and then went on to teach at Emory University. And of course, Dr. Mary Boland, who taught here for quite a few years. There are two people who were students while I was teaching, and while they never took courses with me, I still count them among the shining lights of my career. The first is Vanessa Delmater, Assistant Director of Alumni Relations, who is by choice rather than blood my daughter. The second is Brother Owen Sadlier, recently retired from the philosophy department. He is my office mate, my colleague, and the dearest friend a man could hope for. I want to make special mention of a dearly missed and often remembered colleague, Dr. Frank Macchiarola. I had the extraordinary privilege of teaching moral philosophy with Frank and the extraordinary privilege of counting him as a friend, a staunch defender of both liberal arts in general and philosophy in particular. Dr. Macchiarola truly embodied the Franciscan spirit. He continues to inspire me in my teaching and in my work at the college. I also have Frank to thank for one more thing. When he came to St. Francis, he brought with him his administrative assistant, Wendy Walter, the light of my life, who is now Wendy Galgan. I told her she didn't have to take the name. I am going to end by reading you an email from a former student that I believe encapsulates the influence of a liberal education on a person's life. But first I want to thank you for taking this idiosyncratic and highly personal journey with me through the liberal arts. Life is real. Life is earnest. And the grave is not its goal, I hope. For the past 50 years here at St. Francis, I have worked toward my goal, following the path laid out for me by the liberal arts, a path that began with my parents on the Lower East Side and that ended here in Brooklyn. So here goes on the email. I got this in 2004, July, from Richard Maria to Gerald Galgan. Subject, a former student says, hello. Mr. Galgan, I was an English major and your student in 2 philosophy electives in 1968-69. The names I've long since forgotten, but certainly not yours. You were an inspiration. You typified the type of intelligent person I wanted to be. Little did you know. Back then, philosophy took a back seat only to mathematics in its complexity. However, you took the time to help me wrestle with it and taught me to think with a pencil. We've all graduated to computers now, which as a professional writer is as close to me as my wallet, and as the man said, I can't leave home without it. You gave me an assignment once which changed my life. I was to write a review of a movie. I chose Cool Hand Luke, which had just hit the local Queens theaters. That review was the first bit of creative thinking I ever did up to that point. It was exciting, exhilarating, and paved the way for the rest of my life. Since then, I've spent decades in the advertising and PR field trying to find that creativity and self-fulfillment I once found under your wing. I've made a decent living writing as a journalist, technical writer, and publicist, which at times has brought me a sense of fulfillment. But even after decades have passed, I still remember how excited I felt coming alive in your classes and realizing for the first time my opinion mattered. That was due in no small part to your patience and kindness and teaching ability. And I'm sure there have been countless others after me who have been equally inspired by you. I'm not sure of that. I have faced many ups and downs in my life since those days of Vietnam innocence. Dylan and raising a family of 4, but through all the highs and lows, I look back on those early years with a fondness that has lasted a lifetime and that has given me comfort in times when comfort was a luxury I could ill afford. Mr. Galgan, keep inspiring, keep writing, keep changing students' lives for the better, keep making a difference. Your student always, Richard Murray. Well, that's it. Thanks a lot.
It has been a joy and a privilege for me to know Dr. Galgan in the last 17 years of his 50-year journey with the liberal arts. How does one even begin to say what Dr. Galgan has meant to our department? How does one even begin to describe the kindness and generosity that radiate from his being, his philosophical acumen, the amazing vastness of his culture, the equally amazing fruitfulness of his thinking, steadfastly directed toward the truth, his delightfully refreshing sense of humor. Gerry Galgan has been a pillar of strength. He has been the soul of our department. I would never have been able to carry out the responsibilities of the chairmanship of this department for more than 17 years without him. Gerry, you have been my support my mentor, my inspiration. St. Francis College is honored by your long years of selfless service, and I'm honored to call you my friend. Thank you.